Attached my name to Amendment 25 in the name of the Noble Lord Russell. I rise to speak primarily to that one. And it's a great pleasure to follow the Noble Lady Baroness Harding and agree with every word that she just said. And indeed, she reminded me, I'm going to draw on two elements of my personal history. As a journalist in country Australia in the early 1990s, so pre-internet days, I worked the night shift. At least once a week we would get a frantic phone call from a parent, but calling for a child, along the lines of, "Do you know anything about dolphins?" A school project had just been discovered that needed to be done the next morning, and the source of information that the parent thought of was the local newspaper. They might be able to tell us something. I'm slightly ashamed to say that we had a newspaper to get out and we very quickly told them to go away, I'm afraid. So we weren't a very good source of information in that course. But it is worth remembering, and most people in your Lordship's house will remember, but most young people will have no recollection of a time when there was very little access to information outside the hours when the library was open, or you could go to a bookshop or something. There literally was no other sources available. And that's something that I think we really have to consider this amendment in the light of. I also want to, I'm afraid, slightly disagree with the Noble Lord Bethel's comments in the previous group, because the Noble Lord suggested that it was only with the arrival of phones that the internet became primarily or significantly a children's thing. Well, the best I can date it was either 1979 or 1980. I was playing lemonade stand on one of the early Apples. Now, this might have been considered to be a harmful game from some political perspectives, given it very much encouraged capitalist mindset, profit-taking, and indeed Americanisation of culture. But nonetheless, that was back in certainly 1980, if not 1979. Children were there. And if we look back over the history of the internet, quite a lot of developments, some of the companies actually started out with young people under the age of 18 in some cases, who've actually been at the forefront of innovation and development of what we now think of as our social media or internet world. So this is the children's world as much as it is the adults' world, and that is the reality. I do also want to pick up the points made by the Noble Lord Weir of Ballyholme, who suggested that the Convention on the Rights of the Child was only a guide to government and that it wasn't law. Now, I think it's a great pity that Noble Lady Baroness Kennedy of Shawes is not currently in her place, because she'd be someone who'd be far better equipped to deal with this particular angle than I will, but I'm going to give it a go, which is children's rights are humans' rights. The UN Convention on the Right of the Child is the most backed, most ratified rights convention. Yep.
Yeah, I appreciate what the Noble Lady is saying. I made actually a slightly different point, which I'm not suggesting that what is there is not meant to be law. What I'm saying is it was not written in the form which should be there, simply directly put in as legislation. It wasn't drafted in that particular format on that basis, which is why a direct graft on to a domestic piece of legislation isn't quite the way to do it. It is about using that as guidance as to what should be in the law, rather than simply a direct incorporation.
I thank the Noble Lord for his clarification, although speaking not as a lawyer, my understanding is a human right is a legal right. It is a law. It's a most fundamental right. And every country in the world has ratified this except for the United States, which is another issue. And I will actually also point out that I think it's particularly important that we include reference to children's rights in this bill, given the fact that we are, as a country, currently treating our children very, very badly. There are a huge range of issues, and we really should have a demonstration in this bill and in every bill that the rights of children are being respected across all aspects of British society. Now, I'm not going to get diverted into a whole range of those, but I would point Noble Lords to a report to the United Nations from the Equality and Human Rights Commission in February this year, which highlighted a number of ways in which children's rights are not being lived up to in the UK. But the most relevant part of this letter that the EHRC sent to the UN stresses that it's crucial to preserve children's rights to accessible information and digital connectivity. Now, that's coming from our EHRC. Now, I think it's worth thinking about, and I think it was the Noble Lord Russell who referred to the fact we do live in a global environment, and of course our social media and the internet is very much a global world. And anyone who hasn't looked at it, I'd really urge them to look at a really big report done by UNICEF in 2019, Global Kids Online, which crucially involved a huge amount of surveys, consultation, consideration by young people. And we will get later to an amendment of mine which says we should have the direct voice of young people overseeing the implementation of this bill. I'm not talking about NGOs that represent them, I'm talking specifically about children. We really need to listen to the children and young people. But what this UNICEF report showed that it's quite easy to defend access to information, access to reputable sources. But what this also showed is that by accessing entertainment activities, some of the things that some perhaps grandparents in this room might have some trouble with, is associated with the positive development of digital skills. Furthermore, that report says that when parents restrict children's internet use, and this could also, of course, apply to the government restricting children's internet use, it has a negative effect on children's information-seeking and privacy skills. So if you don't give children the chance to develop these skills to learn how to navigate the internet, and they suddenly go at age 18, and a whole lot of stuff is out there that they haven't developed any skills to deal with, then you are setting yourself up for a real problem. So UNICEF is really stressing the need to have children's access. And interestingly, in this report from, and this was a global report from UNICEF, fewer than a third of children had been exposed to something they'd found uncomfortable or upsetting in the past year. That's on the global scale. And I think that perhaps is an important balance to some of the other debates we've had in your Lordship's House in this bill. And some other figures from this report that I think are worth noting, and this is 2019, so these figures will have undoubtedly gone up. 1 in 3 children globally is an internet user, and 1 in 3 internet users is a child. So I think we've been talking about this as though the internet is the grown-ups thing, but actually that is not the global reality. This is something co-created by, established by, in some cases invented by people under the age of 18. And I think your Lordship's House, I'm afraid to say, is not particularly well equipped to deal with this, but I think we need to understand this as best we possibly can. And I note that report also said, looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, for quality of education, good jobs, reducing inequality, these are all things that the SDGs, internet access, is crucial for children, that this UNICEF report says. And I think one final point, I apologise, I'm aware I've been speaking for a while, but I am very passionate about these issues. Children and young people have agency and ability to act, to engage in politics. In several nations on these islands, 16 and 17-year-olds have the vote. I very much hope that that will also soon be the case in England, and indeed I hope that it will soon be even younger than that children have the vote. Something I was talking about with a great audience of Year 9s at the Queen's School in Bushy on Friday with Learn with the Lords. And I think those children would have a great opportunity.
My Lords, we have a very full order of business to get through, and I would just encourage the Noble Lady, the Baroness, to remain on topic.
Well, I think that is on the topic. If 16 and 17-year-olds are voting, then they have a right to access internet information about voting. That is on the topic, I would suggest. But my final point, anyway, for the pleasure of the noble Lord, my final point is that we have seen examples, and I'm thinking here particularly of young people and children who identify as LGBTIQA+, who we've seen cases historically where there have been blocks and filters that have denied them access to really crucial, important information for them. That's an example of what the risks can be if we don't allow the rights of access. And also, of course, we've seen, the most basic children's rights of all. We've seen blocks and filters that have stopped access to breastfeeding information on the internet. So access is a crucially important issue, and surely what could be more obvious way to allow this than writing in the UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child?
My Lords, I really want to welcome so much